Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary James, for your relatively new assignment as Secretary of the United States Air Force, and General Welsh for your decades of service to this country. This year, the National Commission of the Structure of the Air Force released their findings of their 2-year extensive look at Air Force at force structure in the United States Air Force. The overall thrust of the findings was to shift more components and capabilities to the Guard and Reserves. I agree with many of the Commission's findings, including its findings that there are certain core capabilities better suited for the Guard and Reserves, such as missions in cyber, ISR, and space mission support. Now, I realize the final ratio of this shift is still under study, but can you tell me where you believe the Air Force and the military in general can benefit from shifting these components or capabilities to the Guard and Reserves like those recommended by the Commission?
So, Congressman, I want to associate myself with what you just said. In philosophy, I agree with everything you just said, and our plan, in fact, does shift more responsibility to the Guard and Reserve as we go forward. It's a good deal for the mission. It's a good deal for the taxpayer. The areas of ISR and cyber in particular, again, we agree, and we are bolstering that within our plan for the National Guard and Reserve. So I will say there's much of that Commission's work, the vast majority of it is a fine body of work, really good research, and it's benefiting us, and we agree with most of it, particularly the continuum of service, the associations, and better integration. So those areas we're very much in agreement. There's a couple of areas where we don't agree, at least not yet, and the one that I want to highlight to you is the Commission calls for additional reductions to the active duty forces to the tune of about, I think, 36,000, and for sure for FY15 that's more than we think is prudent. So what we want to do is continue to deliberately analyze mission by mission how can we shift more to the Guard and Reserve. And over the past year, I want to give credit to General Welsh and the other leaders for doing this in a very collaborative way, thinking it through from an operational perspective, but putting as much in the Guard and Reserve as can possibly be done.
General Welsh.
Sir, I think you mentioned cyber as an example. Right now, our percentages are about 60% of our cyber work is done by the active duty, 30 by the Guard, and about 10% by the Reserve. This is one clearly that we have to look at where is the right percentage mix. We started with 0 in the Guard and Reserve here recently. We've gone to 30. A great example, though, of how this works is a Guard cyber squadron in Washington where a number of the folks in that unit work for Google. So they bring skills in the door to the Air Force that we can use now on behalf of national security and to support the state in some circumstances. This is an area ripe for further exploitation.
Well, thank you. Well, as we've discussed, I think, and certainly you brought forward earlier in this hearing, that we have to make difficult decisions, and one of those decisions was certainly the A-10. But I want to commend you to look further into the Guard and Reserves. I just think and I want to commend the Air Force for being more forward-thinking than the other branches of service, but there does tend to be sort of this institutionalized a protection of a culture in terms of maintaining the force levels of the active duty relative to the reserves. And I just think that whenever we can shift, I think there are tremendous opportunities for savings, not simply in the airman-to-airman cost between active duty and Guard and Reserves, but I also think in the legacy cost. When we look at savings out of retirement, the fact that, you know, somebody on active duty for 20 years in the United States Air Force, you know, will draw 50% of their base pay the day after they retire, plus other benefits, and that a Guard or reservist will not draw until age 60, and so there's other differences just besides airman-to-airman cost, I think, that we need to look at. But I want to commend you to that. Last thing, certainly the issue of sexual assault, which has been epidemic in our military, very disturbed at what occurred at Lackland Air Force Base, and just want to make sure. I can tell you, I went to my own Air Force Base Buckley Air Force Base in Colorado and met with the command there, and they briefed me on what they were doing of prevention in terms of sexual assaults, and I was very impressed with what they were doing, hoping that's occurring Air Force-wide. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.